This episode is brought to you by Sterling Soap Company. How often do you think about your soap? Well, if you answered, not much, maybe you should. You see, a lot of what passes for soap in stores is technically not soap, according to the FDA's definition. It's full of lab-created chemicals and detergents because, well, it's cheaper to make. Now, what if you could buy natural soap made from natural ingredients like tallow, palm oil, coconut oil, and scented with essential oils, and for just a little more than you'd pay for grocery store soap? Sterling Soap is 100% natural, and with a wide variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, and cologne, there's a product and a scent for just about everybody. Check them out for yourself at sterlingsoap.com. That's STIRLING soap.com.
Imagine a town forged in the fires of industry, rallying around a band of gridiron gladiators. The Pottsville Maroons weren't just a football team, they were the embodiment of a community's grit, determination, and soaring aspirations. In 1925, they clawed their way to the pinnacle of professional football, only to have it all ripped away in a controversy that still echoes throughout the halls of the NFL. A new book is out that tells the complete story of the Pottsville Maroons. It's titled Marooned: The Rise, the Fall, and the Redemption of the NFL's Pottsville Maroons. Maroon plunges you into the heart of this captivating saga with the roar of the crowd where it mingles with the clang of the coal mines. Authors Jeffrey Payne and Darren Hayes chronicled this team's rise from the humble beginnings to the gridiron dominance and everything in between. Experience the thrill of victory as the Maroons conquer their rivals. Their every triumph a testament to the small town spirit conquering the big city odds. And the fall, and of how they get the redemption and try to get their championship back. It's all covered in Maroons, and you have a unique opportunity to win an autographed copy from Sports History Network and Pigskin Dispatch. The details are found for this contest at sportshistorynetwork.com, your headquarters for sports yesteryear.
This is Basketball History 101 with Rick Loayza.
Welcome back to Award-winning Basketball History 101, part of the Sports History Network. I am your host, Rick Loayza, and this is the podcast where we bring to life some of the forgotten stories from basketball history. We are bringing old school basketball to a new school audience. And today we bring you a special interview with author Zev Eleff. He is a professor of Jewish American history at Gratz College, and he is also the president of Gratz College. We discuss his newest book, The Greatest of All Time, A History of an American Obsession. He discusses a phenomenon that seems to be uniquely American, and that is satisfying the need to determine the greatest in every discipline imaginable. America loves to discuss, examine, and debate the greatest chef, the greatest aviator, the greatest baseball player, the greatest rock album, the greatest sitcom, the greatest actor, the greatest inventor, and on and on and on. As Americans, we can't get enough of it. But since this is a basketball podcast, we will be discussing his book as well as the greatest basketball player of all time, which Eleff devotes time to in his book. So, without further ado, here is part one of our interview with Zev Eleff. Well, welcome back, and here we are with Zev Eleff, the president of Gratz College and a professor of American Jewish history, and we're going to talk about his latest book about the greatest of all time. And so thank you for coming on, Zev. I appreciate you giving us some of your time to go through and talk about what greatness is.
Rick, thanks for having me. This was great.
Now, what I love about the way you approach this is, we are going to get into sports, obviously, we're a basketball podcast. We're going to talk about Jordan and a couple of others. But you really want to approach the concept of the greatest and how we come up with the idea of who's the greatest in a variety of different categories. And what drew you to the concept of trying to kind of study the idea of greatness?
It's a great question. So the book before this one was a history of a Protestant, a Catholic, and a Jew, all first-generation Americans who, believe it or not, win the Rose Bowl. The only time Harvard ever played in the Rose Bowl or any collegiate playoff game. They win the Rose Bowl, do the Harvard Crimson in 1920, and then coach the team. And looking at the sources, there were all sorts of proclamations that Eddie Mahan, no less than Jim Thorpe, said Eddie Mahan is the greatest running back, greatest halfback of all time. Who's Eddie Mahan? And I realized greatness changes. Who we describe as greatness and what accounts for greatness in all sorts of a whole variety of fields changes over time. And maybe I'll offer this analogy. Instead of sitting courtside, I moved to the upper deck, to those conversations. I'm not looking at the game. I'm looking at the players watching. The audience watching the basketball game, watching the football game, evaluating the greatest scientists, or looking at the Beatles versus the Beach Boys versus the Stones. I'm taking a look on top of the highest point in the balcony and looking about how those conversations, those people having them, what that greatness chatter says about the people having those conversations rather than the people themselves.
Right. It's kind of like how we talk about greatness and I suppose what we value as an audience. I think is where you're
What we
going
talk
with.
about when we're talking about greatness.
Yeah. Now I know in your book, I mean, you get into chapters on Henry Ford and Albert Einstein, Charlie Chaplin, Charles Lindbergh, are definitely people who have accomplished great things in their individual fields, and how we look at that, like the greatest statesman, the greatest scientist, and all of this. And you get into at one point you talk about Muhammad Ali, who is the self-proclaimed greatest boxer of all time, and how that was sort of accepted in the 60s as he was, dominating the boxing world.
Well, accepted over time. So one of
Yeah.
the fascinating things about this is that every figure that I cover is well known. After all, they have been declared as, they've been a part of the conversation about greatness. They've been on somebody's Mount Rushmore. And yet
Yes.
nobody's really looked at the contours, how greatness changes and how these conversations play out. So Muhammad Ali, first Cassius Clay, describes himself as, I am the greatest. He puts out a record as an LP right before he crushes Sonny Liston in 1964, declaring that he's the greatest. But nobody really takes him seriously as the greatest because he's an outspoken black man on the wrong, I have my air quotes up, the wrong side of the Vietnam War. But after Vietnam, after that, there's no question he is the greatest of all time. He actually trademarks the term, the GOAT term, much later on. And that's what's interesting to me. Charlie Chaplin, nobody looked. It's amazing. There are dozens of biographies about this man who created Hollywood, so to speak, and yet nobody has looked at, for example, his son's libel suit against the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce when they prevented Chaplin from receiving a star on the Walk of Fame because J. Edgar Hoover accused him of being a communist in the heat of the Cold War. And the same thing in sport. Nobody has looked at how Babe Ruth becomes so-called the consensus greatest of all time. It doesn't take place when he's a player. It doesn't even take place when he retires in the 1930s. Ty Cobb receives more votes than does Ruth for the inaugural class of the Hall of Fame. It's not until Ruth dies in 1948 and then subsequently afterwards when Ty Cobb, a well-known bigot, who changes his mood, his attitude later on, but Ty Cobb during the Civil Rights Movement cannot be baseball's greatest player. They'll take the boozer and the womanizer Ruth over Cobb now.
Right. So that's kind of more like, and like you said, and you do such a great job of making this point. It's really, like you said, it's a reflection of sort of where America was at the time. Like you say, bigot. I mean, you're right. He can't be at the top of the mountain. That's just doesn't um it doesn't go along with where the thinking is at in America.
Thomas Edison can no longer be the greatest American when he sits for an interview in the New York Times and he outs himself as an atheist when 98% of America believes in God.
Right.
Henry Ford can be a genius inventor and a great businessman. But if he doesn't know who Benedict Arnold was, and he doesn't know who fought in the War of 1812, and he's an anti-Semite, he can't be America's greatest man. Mickey Mouse can't be the greatest cartoon character when he's unusable for Walt Disney to produce little short cartoons for the Department of Treasury in the 1940s to convince people to pay their taxes. Mickey wouldn't struggle to pay his taxes. So Walt Disney ascends the steps of Widener Library at Harvard and at Harvard Yard, and he announces he's benching Mickey in favor of a more complicated figure, Donald Duck.
Yeah, this is and all of this. It's so fascinating. But you're right, because you do spend some time talking about Michael Jordan, who for many is the clear greatest of all time, and it's something that I've struggled with. And I think in doing this show, this podcast, I don't think that I've ever gotten into declaring who is the greatest of all time. I've talked about the consensus, but we talk about like a Michael Jordan, for example, and I struggle with that because Will Chamberlain's sheer numbers in a very short in the 14 years that he played, relatively short 14 years, produced incredible numbers that other guys who play 17, 18, 19 years still can't quite reach. And then we have Bill Russell, who has 11 titles, more than anybody. And I'm like, well, isn't that worth something?
The Milwaukee Press, when their team selects Lou Alcindor, they hope he's a Bill Russell type and not a Will Chamberlain type, meaning that he's going to win championships.
Yeah.
The stuff, the material for how we assess greatness, is it numbers? Nobody's going to score 100 points in the game. Nobody's going to do it ever again. I mean, one thinks. Even when the Raptors tried to stop Kobe, still needed another quarter if you were going to reach 100 that game. But of course, Bill Russell, not of course, but what's interesting is that in Bill Russell's career, he was controversial. Mm-hmm. He stood beside Muhammad Ali and Jim Brown in the mid-'60s in favor of the, I'm going to use air quotes again, controversial black athlete. Many people thought Bill Russell, he can't be the greatest of all time any longer. Mm-hmm. Who'd they look for? They couldn't find Will Chamberlain. Will Chamberlain campaigned with Richard Nixon. 9 out of 10 African Americans voted for Humphrey, not right. Chamberlain in 1968. He too betrayed a certain segment of the community. So who did they look to? They looked to Oscar Robertson. Even though he was 6'5", he played, again, I'm using a lot of air quotes, he played like a normal human being. He wasn't too terribly tall. He didn't dunk the basketball. He was well-spoken. Sporting News pasted pictures of him as a lovely and loving husband living in the suburbs. His mother talked about Oscar's belief in God. Again, none of this is for me. I'm not saying Robertson, and this is before we talked about triple doubles, is the greatest basketball player of all time. But already in the 60s and the 70s, Oscar Robertson, more than Chamberlain or Bill Russell, was being spoken about as the greatest of all time because of these external variables.
And I totally agree with you, that we really are revealing more of ourselves. But what do you think it is that about the American psyche that kind of makes it so that we're sort of unable to lay aside some of these other things, these other values that really have nothing to do with the game itself? Why are we incapable of just looking at a person's career and evaluating the career for the career and not necessarily all these other things that are going on?
No, it's a great question. I've struggled with it. I think I have an answer now, though. When you and I sit at a bar and we debate the greatest, let's say, quarterback. Let's make it not about basketball for a second. The greatest quarterback of all time. I'm never going to agree to you that it's Tom Brady. I'm a Ravens fan. He stole, did he and Bill Belichick, several Super Bowls from Ray Lewis and Joe Flacco. I will never agree to you about that. He is a cheater. I will always take Peyton Manning or Steve Young or Joe Montana. Steve Young, controversial, but you know what? When I grew up in the mid-'90s, Steve Young was amazing, and much kinder looking than Brett Favre. When we enter into those conversations, we're trying to debate our values. And I don't want to get overly political here, and I won't. But with every passing decade, it becomes harder for Americans to achieve consensus.
I agree
Right?
with you
When we
there.
debate politics, and when these greatness conversations, these parlor games we play, they're coded conversations for our values. And
Mhm.
just like it's harder and harder for us to agree on shared politics and shared values, it's harder for us to have a consensus. In the 1950s, Americans had a conversation together, and collectively they chose Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth in the 1920s was superhuman. He was unrelatable. He was considered unintelligent. Ty Cobb was the smart baseball player. He ran the base paths. He was almost a scientist on the ball field. Ruth, he was just blessed with superhuman strength. That's not relatable at all.
Mhm.
Eventually, by the 1950s, 1960s, Ruth represented this all-American look. He was a philanthropist. His widow became his legacy and philanthropist. That meant a lot to people. Nowadays, it's really hard to have a candid conversation, which we all agree at the end. It's just harder. So if those conversations generally are hard, these greatness conversations are also hard.
Yeah, it seems to me at some level, at least when it comes to basketball, since that's kind of the area where I spend most of my time, is similar to just like the Hall of Fame. I know we get into the number of Hall of Fames there are in this country in America, but the Hall of Fame is essentially any Hall of Fame is essentially a pantheon of the best in a certain field without necessarily ranking them. It's just this is the collection of some of the best to do this, and there's a part of me that says, can't we just leave it at that?
Well, so I argue this is a 20th century American story.
Yes.
Europeans cared about status. Greatness is an American thing. When Peyton Manning is commissioned by the History Channel to produce a series on greatness, everybody loves it. When similar programs take place in France or England, they bomb. Greatness in America is usually associated with change making. We don't really
Mm-hmm.
care if you're born with status, but if you change the world, if you're Abraham Lincoln, if you're Thomas Edison, if you're
Mm-hmm.
Albert Einstein, if you're Charlie Chaplin, if you're Mickey Mantle, didn't change the way we played. When we look, I know we're forecasting, and he's not in this book, Steph Curry changed the way people think about basketball.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain quality of greatness which is separate from fame. In economics terms, in the early 20th century, there was a run on fame. We had the radio, cheap printing allowed for famous people to have their images inserted into newspapers. All of a sudden now more Americans knew what famous people looked like. And if there's an inflation on fame, that means we need a new category, a new commodity. And greatness became that. So the very first Hall of Fame was NYU, New York University, in 1901, launched the Hall of Fame of Great Americans. So they qualified fame with greatness. Halls of Fame are for famous people. It's not necessarily a ranking, and they don't aim to do that. They mean to collect. If at most about greatness, to curate a conversation around greatness, and maybe we should leave it at that. But then again, if I'm arguing what we talk about while we're talking about greatness, is we're really talking about our own values, and we're debating my values against yours.
It seems to me, and I think this is probably where you're going as well. Is like if you're gonna do it kind of in a more methodical way, and you're gonna sit like you said, you're sitting at a bar, and you're debating greatness. And if you start with debating how we're gonna measure this greatness, so we start to be okay, well, what is important, and it seems like the battle over the measuring stick is kind of the battle behind who you're going to get. Some people will argue for certain statistics or certain um, values that they know is going to get their favorite person at the top, and it's really where the battle lies. Is almost like not with the player, but sort of, you're battling for over how you're going to measure this in the first place.
Not with the player at all. To the contrary, you're absolutely right. In their first memoirs, both Will Chamberlain and Bill Russell address the issue of greatness. And they say, you know what, let it be a tie. Much later, when Oscar Robertson produces his memoir, he says, well, what about me? People forgot about me.
Yeah.
Aren't I the greatest? But most of these athletes are not wired in such a way. Even Jordan versus LeBron. Yeah, you can find some times in which they maybe were a little bit aggravated, likely by the questioner. But the two of them have really eschewed who is the greatest. Different eras, they say, hand checking. One had and the other didn't. It's really for us, fans.
And one of the things you mentioned, like you said, it's so distinctly American. I think in one of your chapters, you say that there are something like 250 halls of fame around the world for all kinds
Right.
of different fields, but about 220, I think it was, are in America. Like we have like 80%, 85% of all the halls of fame are in America, and it just kind of speaks to just why we're so obsessed with it, as opposed to other cultures or nations.
Right. So, of course, the Hockey Hall of Fame belongs in Canada.
Yeah, it does.
but the Accountant Hall of Fame, the Cowboy Hall of Fame, the RV Hall of Fame, if you drive up and down the highways, interstate highways in the Midwest, you'll find a collection of all these different halls of fame.
Yeah.
We like them. We patronize them. We like talking about that more than other people. It's changed, certainly. The Los Angeles Dodgers are banking on greatness chatter taking place in Asia. They make a lot of money because of that. So there's been this American-like greatness infusion internationally. The Olympics will do that. But the generator of all of that discussion, that's here in the United States.
Yeah. It seems to me, if we're going to go back to sort of a really kind of brief overview of America, it seems that because of the way our culture has developed into more of like an individually based culture, an achievement based culture, a meritocracy, at least as compared to other nations, that it sort of fuels that need to figure out who's best, as people are doing their best to achieve in all kinds of fields.
Yeah, and I think that goes with the idea of being a change maker.
Yeah.
In Europe, and I'm thinking in England in particular, it's much as it's assigned to status. There is Sir Francis Galton, who's considered to be the godfather of eugenics, produced a book called The Heredity of Genius. That genius is somehow passed on from one to the other. Don't tell that to Deion Sanders. And what happens in the perception in Europe in this heredity genius is that you really can't change the stock in which you're born into. In the United States, no, we believe in this Horatio Alger type of feeling of rags to riches, that you can make something of yourself if you try really hard. We love those stories. Think about the opening scene of Space Jam. We love to see how hard Michael Jordan worked. We love to talk about how he was cut. He wasn't really cut. He was cut from the varsity team his freshman year. Give me a little break there. But we love those stories. People aren't born, and that has to do with this idea of Will Chamberlain or Babe Ruth. Come on, right? Who's going to stop you?
Right.
That's not genius. You're just born that way.
Right, and I have spent a little bit of time in Europe, where, at least historically speaking, with most of those countries having a monarch in place, and where you were born, you just, your station in life not only wouldn't change, it couldn't change. Where you were born is where you were going to die.
And so nobody talks about it. When Pele, once considered to be the greatest footballer, the greatest soccer player of all time, appears in the White House in the 1970s, President Richard Nixon just says, Pele, the greatest soccer player of all time. Pele looks around, who's he talking to?
Yeah.
Nobody called him the greatest. It just wasn't a discussion point.
Right. It does it seem at some level that some of this, you said, kind of uniquely American approach to greatness, and why we're so excited by the idea of trying to figure out who's the best in each field. Is there some of this that you think is because of the internet is starting to spread to other places outside of America, or do you think it's still really just unique to
Definitely
us?
our globalized conversation about it. The internet allows us. There is no. It is not a privileged asset to be able to recall just how many Cy Youngs or MVPs somebody has won. Just Google it. Get it in a
Right.
second. It definitely fuels these conversations. And the idea that these sports have invested in internationalizing their game, basketball probably first and foremost. That's the Olympics. That's the dream team. That's created, that has imbued this spirit of greatness conversation into other cultures as well. I think you're absolutely right.
That is it for part 1 of our interview with Zev Eleff. Join us next week when we share part 2 of this interview. That's next time on Basketball History 101, part of the Sports History Network, the headquarters of Sports Yesteryear. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com to find out more about this and other sports history podcasts. If you like what you hear, please hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcast. And check out our page on Facebook. It's called Basketball History 101 Podcast. There you will find shorter historical posts, and I'll also announce there when new episodes come out. I want to thank my producer and editor, Jacob Loayza. Join us each week as we continue to mine the history of basketball for more great stories in the past. Take care, and see you soon.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. The heel gets the heat. The babyface gets the cheers. But the jobber gets, well, the job done. And speaking of jobbers, Barry Horowitz wasn't there to win titles. He was there to build them. By selling every move, every storyline, and every new star that stepped into the ring. He was the secret sauce. And now, he's the headline in his new book titled Wrestling is My Gimmick, My Life on the Wrong Side of the 3 Count. This memoir is a deep dive into wrestling's most underrated position and the man who made it an art form. Whether you're a fan of wrestling, a fan of sports history, or just love a great story, this book is for you. Again, that's Wrestling is My Gimmick by Barry Horowitz. Grab your copy today before the count strikes 3.